Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine like a sudden shockwave hitting entire economies, thousands of jobs just gone, and, international relationships stretched really thin. That's pretty much exactly what's happening right now, far beyond the big headlines. Today, we're diving deep into President Trump's recent tariff announcements. Those are basically taxes on imported goods and how they're, well, significantly impacting African countries. Our main source for this deep dive is a CBS News report from August 1st, 2025. It details the immediate aftermath and looks at what these shifts might mean going forward.
Right, and our mission today really is to cut through all the noise. We want to extract the critical nuggets of insight, not just what happened, but crucially why it matters for global trade, for African economies.
And potentially even for everyday items you might buy. And what we found digging into this reveals some genuinely surprising connections. While, yeah, many countries are affected, we're going to focus our deep dive today mostly on the two most significantly impacted nations, South Africa and Lesotho. But we'll also touch on the broader implications for the whole continent. This is where it gets really interesting. So let's get into the specifics first. President Trump's tariff announcement. It came down Thursday night, July 31st, 2025. South Africa got singled out, hit with a 30% tariff increase effective August 7th. But most other African countries received tariffs, more in the range of 10 to 15%.
And crucially, this wasn't completely out of the blue, was it?
No, not entirely.
African countries had sort of been bracing for bad news, and we saw a lot of scrambling, frantic last-minute negotiations happening in the lead-up, trying to avoid exactly these outcomes.
So we've heard the general tariff levels, but Lesotho, that really stands out as a dramatic example. What exactly made them so vulnerable? And, how quickly did this threat become a painful reality for people there?
That's a really important point. What's truly striking about Lesotho is just how fast a tariff threat translated into real, tangible economic pain. You see, this tiny mountain kingdom, just over 2 million people, they actually declared a state of emergency way back in April.
Wow.
Yeah, right after the initial declaration of a 50% tariff, which was the highest in the world at the time. They're often called the denim capital of Africa. They make textiles for huge brands, Levi's, JCPenney, Walmart, Costco, you name it.
The textiles are everything there.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The textile industry is the country's main employer. We're talking as many as 50,000 jobs. So this unique vulnerability, this heavy reliance on one sector, helps explain why they got singled out for such a massive tariff initially.
It's incredible, isn't it, how one sector can just prop up an entire economy. And what really jumped out at me in the report was this amazing detail. Back in March, President Trump, during the speech about wasteful expenditure, actually singled out Lesotho, called it an African nation no one has ever heard of.
Yeah.
For a country that small to be mentioned like that, what was the impact?
Well, you can imagine that remark just reverberated across the country. It kicked off months of really intense diplomacy for Lesotho, and it ended with some significant concessions on their part. They even expressed a willingness to accept deportees from the U.S., offered other financial incentives too.
Really? Just to get the tariff lowered?
It seems so. These kinds of desperate measures likely helped revise those massive initial tariff threats downwards, which is, probably why we're seeing 50% now, rather than something potentially even higher. It's a very clear illustration of how quickly words, even offhand remarks, can trigger real-world economic and diplomatic pressure.
Okay, let's shift to South Africa then. Their situation seems to highlight even more strained relations. The report mentions South African Trade Minister Parks Tau, other officials. They'd been working for months across different sectors trying to negotiate with Washington. They even offered to invest, $3.3 billion in U.S. industries, plus buying natural gas. But the report noted a serious breakdown in those talks.
Absolutely. The negotiations basically hit a wall. According to the report, there was just no response to their initial offer until Wednesday evening, July 30th. And then U.S. officials simply told them to, quote, improve their offer in a last-minute appeal.
Well, just like that.
Yeah. And what this lack of engagement implies, it speaks volumes about the state of diplomatic relations, doesn't it? It really suggests a lack of willingness to genuinely engage, almost like the outcome was predetermined.
Right. And after the announcement, Trade Minister Tau put out a public statement. He said, "We are working with urgency and resolve to implement real, practical interventions that defend jobs and position South Africa competitively in a shifting global landscape." Okay. So we're not just talking economics here. Are you saying these tariffs are essentially a direct result of deeper political disagreements? Could this set a new maybe dangerous precedent?
That's a crucial question, I think. This isn't just about trade policy. It's a really stark example of how political tensions can, well, weaponize economic policy deeply. What we seem to be seeing here, Trump's false claims about South Africa having race-based laws, seizing white farmers' land, the refugee offers to Africans farmers, which incidentally hundreds have accepted.
Right, I remember reading that.
And even the U.S. government's unhappiness with South Africa taking that genocide case to the International Criminal Court. It seems these aren't just background noise. They appear to be direct levers, sort of driving these punitive tariffs. It feels like a new frontier in geopolitical leverage where trade becomes a tool to express political displeasure quite openly.
And the economic warnings for South Africa are just stark. The Reserve Bank Governor, Kanyanga, warned back in mid-July that a 30% tariff could mean losing 100,000 jobs.
100,000.
That's a staggering human cost we're talking about. It really brings home the immediate, tangible impact of these policies on ordinary people. Yeah. And economists are specifically warning that the country's agriculture and automotive industries, they're going to be hit the hardest. And then there are those unexpected ripple effects, right? Like, here's a fascinating detail. Even U.S.-made cowboy boots might suffer.
Cowboy boots? How?
Because of the 30% tariff hitting South Africa. Apparently, South Africa produces the overwhelming majority of the prized ostrich leather used for high-end cowboy boots.
No kidding. Ostrich leather.
Yeah. Who would have thought our taste for fancy boots would get tangled up in international trade disputes?
It just goes to show you, doesn't it, how deeply intertwined these global supply chains really are, and how widely tariffs can spread their impact in ways you wouldn't even imagine.
Exactly. And that brings us to an even larger concern, really, for the whole African continent. The looming threat to AGOA. That's the African Growth and Opportunity Act.
Right, AGOA.
It was created back in 2000, part of that whole trade not aid philosophy. And it gives something like 35 African countries duty-free access to the U.S. market for their goods.
And this raises a really important question. Just how crucial is AGOA for these economies? What would canceling it actually mean on the ground?
What would it mean?
Well, losing this free entry, it would mean all the goods currently exported under AGOA suddenly face tariffs. Economists are warning this would significantly impact these countries' economic growth. You could see rising inflation, currencies depreciating. It's a massive hit that many of these countries will really struggle to absorb. It fundamentally alters their economic outlook.
And the clock is ticking, isn't it? The deadline for AGOA's renewal is coming up in September, and analysts cited in the report believe President Trump might just cancel it altogether. What does that kind of uncertainty do?
Well, this potential cancellation isn't just about the economic loss, massive as that could be. It's forcing African nations to confront a critical strategic question. How much can they really afford to rely on a single trading partner, especially one that seems increasingly unpredictable? Analysts are now looking towards the G20 meeting in November that's happening in South Africa, ironically, as a potential turning point. A moment, perhaps, for African countries to try and forge new regional and global trade deals specifically designed to bypass the U.S. That would be a huge shift in their global strategic thinking.
And the sentiment from some quarters is getting very strong. Patrick Bond, he's a distinguished professor at the University of Johannesburg, told CBS News, and I'm quoting here, "I think we tossed the U.S. out of the G20 for so many reasons and get tougher on Donald Trump to no collective will that is the only response now."
Yeah.
It's pretty forceful language.
It really is. And it stands in stark contrast to President Trump's own statement, apparently made on Air Force One, that he might skip the G20 altogether. Why? Because of problems with South Africa and their very bad policies. Bond's advice for South Africa's internal strategy is equally direct. He's basically saying, we must diversify export markets, look at our own infrastructure projects, have massive subsidies for that. He's acknowledging, quite bluntly, none of the approaches in our toolbox are working, so we must move to new options and protect our industries.
And South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, his response was more diplomatic, naturally, but still quite telling. He said, "We deal with every government with the required respect and dignity, and we expect that respect to be reciprocated." But then he conceded, maybe the key part, that it's too risky to be dependent on one country for trade.
That says a lot, doesn't it? Even amidst the diplomacy.
It really does. So to kind of wrap up this deep dive then, we've unpacked the immediate economic shocks hitting South Africa and Lesotho because of these new tariffs. We've explored the much broader implications if AGOA is canceled, what that means for the entire continent. And we've discussed this shifting landscape of global trade relations.
Right. And I think what's fascinating here is how quickly these immediate trade disputes escalate. They become questions of sovereignty,
Hmm.
economic independence. The very fabric of global alliances seems to be fraying or at least being retested. It's a stark reminder of just how interconnected our thing is.
So as you, our listener, consider all these developments, what stands out to you? How might these seemingly localized tariff disputes ripple outwards? How could they reshape global supply chains, political alliances, maybe in ways we haven't even thought of yet? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll keep unpacking the world's most compelling stories for you right here.